it's hard not to get invested in whales and dolphins when you read about them. It's very touching. One of the things that I never knew about whales before, they're so famous for their songs, but songs are just a very small proportion of a fairly small group of whales. And most whales have a pretty big repertoire of other, I'll call them vocalizations. And those vocalizations are where they actually, define their identity and mediate their relationships. And one of the things that I got really fascinated with whales was this idea of contact calls and the bond between a mother and a calf. So um, it's such a basic thing, but this is an example of the sort of thing you just don't think about. But whales don't have arms. They can't hold their babies, and yet they have very dependent calves that nurse for like 2 years. Whales do have nipples, if you're wondering. And they nurse for like 2 years, and the calf can't hunt for itself. The mother has to hunt and find food for herself. And you think about the fact that, like we said, light doesn't work very well in the ocean. In coastal waters, it's often kind of like you get a lot of silt, you get a lot of plankton, and there's this, kelp forest. Like you can't see that well underwater. And so if you have a dependent calf and you have to go hunt, how do you keep in touch? Like you can't hold your baby, and yet it's a baby. And so they murmur to each other, mom and calf from humpbacks, belugas, dolphins, all these species, they murmur to each other very, very quietly. And they're just constantly saying, like, you there? You there? Yep, you there? Yep, you there? No, there you are. Oh, did you go over there? Yes, I went over here. Okay. And it's really, really quiet. They don't want to attract predators. But I mean, that's just cool. Whales hold their babies with sound, basically. Well, also they try to stay close and touching as well, but like when they can't be physically together, they literally hold their children with sound. But I also got very attached to the plainfin midshipman fish. Um, just to take a bit of a hard left. Where I live in Victoria, there's a fish that lives along the coast, and it's called the plainfin midshipman. And it's just such an awkward, cumbersome name. And the reason it's called the plainfin midshipman is I guess its fins are kind of plain. I'm not a judge. And then it has like this row of kind of photophores on its body that look like the buttons on a British midshipman's coat. So it was called like the plainfin midshipman. But it's the weirdest little fish. It's about this long, like maybe, I don't know, 6, 8 inches. And it doesn't have scales. It just has like kind of gooey skin. It has this big, giant triangular head and this little body. And every spring, the males will swim up on the shore. They find like a rocky shore, and they'll make a nest under a rock, like right at the tide line, so that when the tide is low, usually they're often actually out of the water. And they'll set up this nest and they will bulk up these special muscles in their body that are bracketing their swim bladder, which is kind of a gas-filled bladder in their body they use to control buoyancy. And then they start to vibrate these muscles. And it's the fastest, one of the fastest, if not the fastest, muscle in the vertebrate kingdom, I believe. Although you may want to fact check that, but it's if not the fastest, it's one of the fastest. It's like 100, 200 times a second. And it goes for hours, and it starts at like, I don't know, 9 o'clock at night for a couple of weeks in the spring, and it just goes. And there's these huge swaths of fish on these rocky shores, and it's not like a fascinating sound. It's like the sound of a foghorn or like a drone or something. But what they're doing is they're calling out into the water. They're sending this really powerful sound out into the water to attract females. And the females will find like the male with the strongest sound because the strongest sound literally correlates to the strongest muscle, to the strongest male, the biggest male. And she'll come up and she'll find him and they'll mate and she'll leave the eggs with his nest and that he will guard the eggs until the babies hatch. And his sort of advertisement of strength is I can also endure and take care of these eggs until they hatch. So it's that sort of same old story of the animal kingdom, but he's advertising his fitness with sound, literally. And in the spring, his muscles, those muscles will swell up to like multiple times their regular size. And hormone receptors in the female's ears will actually tweak her hearing sensitivity so that she becomes more sensitive to the harmonics of his sound. So normally she's listening to sounds in this frequency range, but during mating season, she changes her frequency of her hearing so that she, well, not changes the frequency, but changes the sensitivity so that she can tap into his sound better. And I was obsessed with hearing these fish because where I live, I was like, well, if you're writing a book about sound underwater, you better go out and listen to the fish in your own backyard. And it seemed like it wouldn't be that difficult because I'd done some research on the history of it. And it turns out that these fish had annoyed houseboaters in Sausalito in San Francisco in the 80s, and people had been like, I can't sleep, the Navy's doing something, it's aliens or something, and they finally had to go out and find out that it was in fact these fish humming, and the houseboaters were hearing them through the hull of their boat. And they drowned out hydrophones before. I was like, this is going to be easy. So I bought this little dip hydrophone that you can buy these if you look for scientific equipment. You just buy them for a couple $100. And I went out and I stalked the shoreline of Vancouver Island for 2 years. And I know I alarmed some homeowners, and I know that I went into parks when I shouldn't have, and I was like crawling around gates, and I was like going out docks, and like I had these giant headphones, and I had attached the hydrophone handle to a broomstick so I could like fish it out over the water. And it was the tangliest cord in the world. So I actually had to bring assistants along sometimes because it was a 50-foot cord and they would have to feed it out for me. And I'm trying to listen to these fish, and I couldn't find them. And I found these papers, these scientific papers that had given geographic coordinates where they had heard fish before. So I drove up all the way to up near Nanaimo, and I like camped out in this park, and I was, listening to this, and I could not hear these freaking fish. And it became a problem. And one time actually, I was in a park. I was getting to be sunset, and I was like, this is the night. This is the night. Absolutely the night. And I looked down, and there was a dead midshipman at my feet. And I was like, whoa, oh my gosh. And then I looked around me and I suddenly realized there was a bunch of dead midshipmen around me. And I was, a little alarmed. And then I realized there was seagulls all over the place. And these fish, when they come up and they make that sound, they're making a pretty big risk. Like they're putting themselves above the tide line, and they're just easy prey for these birds. So it just goes to show you like how much of a trade-off strategy that is. Anyways, last spring, finally, I went out to this resort town up the coast of the Saanich Peninsula in British Columbia, and I did not have hope. I did not believe this would make a difference, and I just kind of threw my hydrophone into the water, and it's nothing, 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 nothing. Hear this little plink, and then all of a sudden, and I was like, "It's them! It's the fish!" And it's like not a special sound, but when you know what it means. And it was so funny because it was like a sailboat mooring, and there was like a resort, there was a party going on above the water, and you could hear this guy like rowing out to his boat with these little like plinks across the quiet water. And I was like, so above the water, I'm hearing these sounds, and I can't hear anything about the fish. And then as soon as I take this hydrophone, I would never even hear it, I'm sure, even if I stuck my head underwater. A hydrophone is a microphone that works in the water and everything. And so as soon as you put the hydrophone in the water, the party disappears, the sailboats disappear, the rowing splash disappears, maybe the rowing splash a little bit, but and you just hear these fish. And it's like these two worlds. It's completely separate, and you would just never know. And I had to search for 2 years